For our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on.
Yeah, that debate last night was an absolute domination, as I said. JD Vance completely mopped the floor with Tim Walz. Even if you were at a bar and you weren't listening to the debate, you were just watching it because they had it on. Here in D.C., they do that. Instead of like football games and baseball games, they put on like news channels and political debates. It's weird. We're weird here in D.C. Just the visuals, just the side-by-sides, the confidence that JD Vance projected, and the absolute flop sweats and uncomfortable, bewildered essence that is Tim Walz. It was just awful. It was terrible if you're a Democrat. But for me and my Republican, can I just say this? That was quite possibly the most commanding, intelligent, empathetic, compassionate, well-delivered, professional, complete and total ownership of the facts and the platform and stage on behalf of JD Vance that I have seen in my mature political lifetime. And I say that because when Ronald Reagan was debating back in the day, I wasn't really a grown-up. I wasn't really focusing much on it. That was a complete and total masterclass by JD Vance. I'll say this, and this is very, very rare. This morning, I woke up proud to be a Republican with that man on the ticket for my party. And I guess there have been some post-presidential or vice presidential debates when I felt proud to be a Republican, but more because of the contrast with the Democrat. You know, I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm not supporting that person, right? But no, I'm proud to be a Republican because I'm proud to say, yeah, that's our guy. That's our future. That was something else. And let's kick it off right here in our analysis with what could be sort of the quintessential moment of the debate, not just showing off JD Vance's command of the facts and the moment and the platform he was on, but also the CBS News moderators' intrusion into our process, their attempt to meddle in our right as citizens to hear from our candidates and evaluate what they have to say. CBS News couldn't stop themselves. It's who they are. Watch this.
Clarifies for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process.
Oh, wow. Wow. We're going to break this down. We're going to take our time with this because this is everything. This is everything about the contrast between those two men. It's everything about the propaganda media and how they go about their business. It's everything about who JD Vance is and what his capabilities are. And let's not forget, this is probably the most, or at least the second most dominant topic of our time. It's, for Republicans, the number one issue, I think, according to Republican voters and polls taken of them. And it's the number two topic for Democrats: border security and immigration and the results of the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris policies on the border. So let's do this step by step here.
Just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
all right. So what you just saw there, as JD Vance properly pointed out, was, oh, you guys promised that you weren't going to do any fact checking. You know, he said his thing, I said my thing. Let's sort it out afterwards. But Margaret Brennan, the host of Face the Nation, couldn't help herself. She had to throw this little snide, FYI for our audience, because I don't want our audience to be misled by that evil Republican JD Vance. So let me just say, ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. First of all, by the way, completely insulting of her audience, because she thinks that we don't know the facts either, and we're not capable of figuring out whether a politician is lying to us, even though, we're sentient adults living in America, meaning we've had politicians lying to us our entire lives. So give us a little credit here, Ms. Brennan. But no, she had to jump in there, especially having to do with the Haitian immigrants, right? She had to say they have temporary protective status. My guess is that JD Vance may have referred to them as illegal immigrants. I can't remember exactly what led up to this. But now watch, as she tries to then steamroll over JD Vance, who obviously sees what's happening here, and try to move on. Because my favorite thing, that we have so much that we want to get to, that they want to get to. We're voters. The First Amendment protects our right to be able to be informed voters. This has nothing to do with their rundown and all the topics that they really wanted to ask today. It has to do with us being able to hear from our candidates.
Thank you,
Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
we're
because
going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that
The
you guys
economy,
weren't going to fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a.
All right. Now, first of all, most Americans don't know this, actually, and this is not insulting to viewers, because they do this on purpose. They obscure this. I bet a lot of you were like, why are these 10 million people in this country over the last 3.5 years when they entered illegally? Why are we allowing them all in? And this is why. Because they're claiming asylum status. He even cites the name of the form. This is a man who's only been in government for less than 2 years. He comes from the private sector. He's only been a senator for less than 2 years, and he's able to cite the form. Look at this. Do you think that Tim Walz, forget about deer in the headlights. Okay, maybe it's deer in the headlights. It's really like the second before you hit that deer, though. I mean, he is about to get rolled over by the SUV, this deer. Do you think Tim Walz has any idea the actual process for an illegal immigrant at the border claiming asylum status or refugee status so that they can stay here temporarily illegally? Do you think he has any idea? He's actually being schooled. And in fact, look at his eyes. It's like, oh my God, they're not going to ask me about this. It's the CBP. What now? That's why he starts writing. What was the name of the form he just cited?
A Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret.
This is incredibly important, because whenever people in the media say, hey, just so you know, the refugees who have been brought to Springfield, Ohio from Haiti, they are not here illegal. They're here legally. It makes you think, oh, so they went through the legal immigration process. They applied in their home country. They found a sponsor. They were granted a visa. They came in here. They got a green card. They're able to work. They're now going through the naturalization process. So is that it? Really? Is that what they're doing? No. They flooded the border. They trampled themselves in. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris just decided to give them TPS, temporary protective status. Temporary. Key letter in TPS being temporary. Did you know that there are immigrants in this country who have come here without going through the due process? They entered the country illegally. They were granted temporary protective status, and they've been here for over a decade. Temporary. When people say we have a broken system, this is an example of the broken system. JD Vance has a command of the knowledge. He's actually engaging in the debate, which last I checked, that's what this whole thing was supposed to be last night at 9 p.m., a debate. He's making his case, and he's bringing facts to it. Margaret Brennan was not accurate in her fact check. She misrepresented the truth. She was obscure. At the very least, she only gave partial explanation as to the legal status of the Haitian immigrants in question. So JD Vance is actually doing a better job of fact-checking the fact-checker here than Ms. Brennan did.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process.
And she cuts him off midstream with that snide, patronizing, "Thank you for describing the legal process." No, this is actually relevant context as to how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been able to circumvent our existing laws and flood our nation and flood communities like Springfield, Ohio, with tens of thousands per town of the people who shouldn't even be here. They have no legal right to be here. They don't have a legal right to be here. They've been given legal status while they're here. And that's a distinction that's very important here.
So much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
we want to have
app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
They cut their mics. This is a debate. Here we've got two politicians, two grown-ups, one a governor, one a senator, both wanting to be vice president. They're engaging in a back and forth over a critically important issue, and they cut the microphones because we're trying to have a debate here. The last thing we want is the two of you debating. Then she chuckles about it. The most telling thing is what she just heard, where she said, the audience can't hear you. The audience, because it's a show. We're not an audience. We're citizens. We're voters. We have the right to hear these elected officials, unencumbered by your intrusion. The audience? Because, you see, this isn't really a debate as far as CBS News is concerned or Norah O'Donnell and Margaret Brenner are concerned. No. This is a show that they're getting ratings for, they're getting paid for, and they're trying to elevate their profiles and their platforms so they can get a nice contract next time it's up. This is about their ego. This is about their profile. This is about how well they perform. The best moderators of a debate are like referees at a football game. You shouldn't be talking about them the next day. They should disappear into the background. But that doesn't help you get that big contract at the network and get that next promotion. So that's what we saw. But it would be one thing if that was the only time that Margaret Brennan decided to fact check or the moderators decided to fact check. But see, here's the thing. There was a whole lot that went on in this debate that could have been fact checked that didn't get fact checked. You can tell just by the side-by-side imagery was so amazing in this debate. And this is another perfect example of JD Vance is dying to fact check the buffoon on your right. He wasn't really able to, given the format, but we're going to help you out. Let's see what Tim Walz is saying.
Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office.
Oh, I'd like you to have the opportunity to reply to the allegation that the vice president is letting people in across the border. Where do we begin with this? I guess there's really just one thing that we can do. You remember about, what was it, 10 months ago? On this program, we talked about the showdown between the Supreme Court, Joe Biden's administration, and the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, as they were putting razor wire up to protect the state of Texas from illegal crossings at the Rio Grande. And they want a temporary order to not to remove the razor wire per se, but the federal government, as they usually do at the Supreme Court level, won the argument that the border is their jurisdiction, right? And what did the Biden administration do? The Biden administration sent forklifts to the border and put the forklifts underneath the razor wire and then lifted up the razor wire to keep the flow of illegal immigrants coming across the border. They literally used heavy machinery to impede the state of Texas's efforts to protect the border so that they could let people. I mean, they were literally going out of their way to let illegal immigrants into this country. That is 100% the truth, 100% the fact. And the only item this guy can come up is illegal crossings are down from the Trump administration. First of all, that's not a real number. Second of all, he's only referring to the last like 4 months when Joe Biden decided to do something because the election was coming. Oh, but there's more.
They respond to that. First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive. And there are a lot of people who should still be alive. And I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me. But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong
This
about,
was-
Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong
That is
about?
not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting against, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Yeah, they fact-checked it with President Trump. Well, let's fact-check it right now. It's not what the law says. Well, here's what the law says. This is the actual law. JD Vance knows more about Tim Walz's law having to do with babies who survive an attempted abortion than Tim Walz knows, or he's just a liar. This is the law that Tim Walz made sure was codified and signed into law, but with his hand as governor. You can see the effective date and the change of this law. Subdivision 1, recognition, medical care is, now the word medical is taken out. Okay. A born alive is taken out. It used to read, a born alive infant as a result of an abortion who is born alive shall be fully recognized as a human person. That's what it used to say. A born alive infant as a result of an abortion who is born alive shall be fully recognized. They turned that around. They took abortion language out of it, and they said an infant who was born alive shall be fully recognized as a human person. Then you drop down to the last part of this paragraph, and it said, all reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel. It used to read, to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. So in other words, the law used to say an infant, a born alive infant as a result of an abortion shall be fully recognized, and all reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. That's what it used to say. Now it says an infant who is born alive, blah, 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 blah. And then it says all reasonable measures, blah, 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 to care for the infant who was born alive. So they took all references to abortion out of it. In other words, if you're attempting to have an abortion and you failed the first time and the baby survives, there is no legal obligation to actually protect that child. That's the law. And there's no two ways about it. There's no fake fact checking about it. There's no spinning it. They're just lying about it, or they're ignorant. It's A or B. Pick your poison. Could be both, I suppose. They're certainly morally ignorant. The CNN even. Let's go to Scott Jennings here because he lays this out in no uncertain terms. You're stuck with David Axelrod, as you'll see here, as Scott Jennings lays out exactly what I just laid out for you and what the truth of the Minnesota law is. All David Axelrod is left with, he can't mimic what Tim Walz just did, which is just a bald-faced lie. That's not true. That's not what the law says. No, it's like 100% what the law says. You just saw the law. All David Axelrod could do was, okay, but, you know, I mean, what shape are those babies in that were born alive? I kid you not. Watch.
So give him credit for solicitude. Look, the policies, maybe not.
I just had this thing in Minnesota. There were 8 deaths among infants who survived abortion attempts during Tim Walz's tenure as governor. It happened. They don't want to talk about the fact that it happened, but there were children.
What's the source?
First
What
of all, let me ask you a question. Since you've deeply researched this, what were the condition of these? What of these
Look,
babies when
Baby, the word, he couldn't even bring himself to it. He was trying to find another word. He eventually realized, well, I guess baby is the best I got. But did you hear how he stammers? What was the condition of these things, these accidents? These are human. These are babies. These are human. That's David Axelrod for you. Having trouble finding the word. He eventually landed on babies and then just tried to move along really quickly.
you've deeply researched this, what were the condition of these? Of these
Look,
babies when they were
why
born?
can't
What
Walz
what
just
what
admit
was
it?
the participation of the
They
family?
tried to abort the babies and they survived the abortion and then they died.
And you think that families casually tossed them aside?
No, I think.
Tell me what their condition
Here's the
I
was,
thing.
think
Scott.
Tim Walz
Could
casually
they have
tossed the
survived?
truth
And
about it aside.
was it a
No.
case of families
That's what I
not
think.
wanting children to suffer when they were told that they are doomed?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that
and that is the
I know.
reality
So
of the
that
case.
that
But
seems
you know what?
important to me.
Here's what I will say. Keep talking about that because when you all talk about abortion like this, it is when women and that gender gap continues to divide, not in your favor. Because women, it is disrespectful to pretend like women are making choices about abortion. That is the intent to just let a baby die at 9 months. Let me finish it here. And it is dishonest for JD Vance to go up there and try and push that narrative. And that is what I'm saying when I said he presented well, but his policies and what he was saying was not truthful. It just wasn't. And that is why the overwhelming American people, since Roe has been overturned, you guys are not winning. You are not winning. And if you run on this issue, you will not win in November.
They're not running on this issue. They're running.
They're lying on this issue.
They're running on. It's up to the states, and they're running on Donald Trump's moderate position of some reasonable restrictions, rape,
They're
incest, and
lying.
life of the
Can I
mother,
say something?
IVF support.
They're
Can I
lying.
just say
very
something about
moderate.
this?
They're lying.
You are one of your frequent go-to points is Kamala Harris said this in 2019. That's her position. Donald Trump said women should be punished if they had an abortion. Why shouldn't we hold him to that? You talk about his moderate position. His moderate position has been adopted over the course of this campaign for purposes of this campaign after he put the justices on the Supreme Court who overturned Roe, who've created a crisis for women who live in 20 states in this country.
His position is moderate, and it is in line with what I think most Americans.
Do you believe
want.
him when he said
And-
that women should
And I
be?
think Harris and Walz have proven they cannot discuss even a single restriction that they want.
Do you believe when he said women should be punished? Do you believe
I don't
him?
believe, and no
Do you
Republican
believe?
wants
Do you
women to be
believe? No, but he said
he
it.
said
Do you
it.
believe him when he said it?
And at the time, it was roundly
believe-
criticized by other Republicans.
Did you believe him when he said it?
I can tell you what Republicans believe, which is
I'm just
reasonable.
asking you what Trump believes.
I'm telling you what he's running on right now.
I
But
know
what
what he's
he's
running on
is
right now.
inconsistent because
know
he's
what he's
running on
running
it
on
to
right
win.
now.
He's not running
Look,
on it because it's
I
what
get it.
he
I
actually
would attack
believes.
if I couldn't articulate a single restriction, I would attack Trump.
This is what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz believes is that it's none of your business what women do with their body. And so stay out of our doctor's offices and stay out of our bed.
Well, I guess I'll have to speak up for the babies. They're not here to speak for themselves. Lord have mercy.
Let's check back in with Jay.
That's pretty good stuff from Jennings there. And again, as you saw, it's impossible to actually try to spit. This whole discussion was about what is the law in Minnesota. That should be pretty easy. I mean, where's CNN with the graphic that I just showed you? No, this shouldn't be up for debate. What is the law in Minnesota? What is the law that Tim Walz as governor signed into law in Minnesota? And instead we get this other, well, Trump said this in 2016 at a town hall before he was elected. And what are the status of those babies that were born after their parents tried to abort them? And maybe the parents were trying to end their suffering. Yeah, the parents who just tried to abort that baby they're just trying to end their suffering. You square that circle for me. But nowhere in that discussion is the actual fact. This is supposed to be a fact check, right? Where we're supposed to go after the truth. Who was telling the truth about the abortion law? Well, there's only one way to do that. Do what I just did. Look at the law. They wouldn't do that. You know why? Yes, you do know why. The one moment on the debate stage where the moderators actually cornered Tim Walz on an issue was something that just popped up thanks to the Washington Free Beacon, right of center, conservative colleagues over there at the Washington Free Beacon who did investigative reporting that was begun by Minnesota Public Radio. Tim Walz has always claimed, forever has claimed, that he was in Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square. It now turns out that there's reports that shows that he was not in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square uprisings. So that came up in the debate. Let's see how Tim Walz did.
Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can.
So the question is, you have said that you were in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protests in China, and now it turns out you weren't. You were actually in Nebraska. Can you please explain why you lied about it? And have you gotten an answer yet? I mean, we've learned that he rode his bike when he was a kid in his hometown in Nebraska. I guess if he rode his bike to China, it took him a while. So that's why this answer is taking so long. Does this work for anyone when they do this? This is, it's one thing, listen, I want to give you context. I want to explain everything. Listen, I'm just a down-home guy who grew up in a small town. I was excited to go to China. I used these trips a bit. And you can go ahead and do all of that, I guess, if you want. But here's how you answer the question. Why were you saying that you were in Hong Kong when you weren't in Hong Kong? Yeah, I'm sorry. You know what? Honestly, I was exaggerating my life. I was there a couple of months later. All right. And at the time that I was asked the question, I sort of I wanted to explain that I was impacted by it. So I shouldn't have said that. And I did. But here's the bigger point. And then you go on. But he still hasn't actually answered the question in any way whatsoever. It goes on for another minute. I'm not going to waste your time with it. But let's get right to the end here because, again, with JD Vance, it's like, are they really going to let him get away with this? Look at the look on JD Vance. Let's get to the very end here where it's actually finally called on him that he didn't answer the question.
Care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests, went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Well, that clears everything up, doesn't it? Sure clears it up for me. Does it clear it up for you? This was just an absolute demolition. This was the Hindenburg crashing into the Titanic. It was so bad. And by the way, one other thing that needs to be there's more that needs to be fact-checked, but I do want to point this out because we're in the business of the First Amendment here. We're in the business of free speech. We're kind of concerned about what the Biden administration did to shows like this and social media commentary on Facebook and on Twitter at the time, and certainly on the platform that you're sitting on, unless you're sitting on Rumble right now watching us. That should freak you out, that the government gets in and puts pressure on these companies to censor us and silence our voices. So there was a question about the First Amendment that came up toward the end of the debate, having to do with reactions to the 2020 presidential campaign. And what Tim Walz had to say about the First Amendment, I think, deserves a little scrutiny from our corner here, our little corner of the internet where we celebrate the First Amendment, because this is a warning sign for all y'all. This is a warning sign for everybody in the chat right now, anybody leaving comments. If the Harris-Walz campaign don't like the tone of your comments, oh, you'll get a knock on the door. Just watch.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds.
There's more to this, but I don't know if you caught that. He said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation, which, by the way, there is. But then Tim Walz wanted to clarify everything and wanted to say, or hate speech. Actually, there is a First Amendment right to hate speech. You may not like for that. See, here's the beauty about the First Amendment. It's there to protect stuff that you don't like. It's there to protect stuff I don't like, including hate speech. I'm no fan of hate speech, but I want the First Amendment to be there so that people can be assholes. Sorry, I didn't hit my bleep fast enough. But that's the truth. That's the truth, because here's the problem when you say, okay, yeah, we want freedom of speech, except for misinformation and hate speech. Well, but then that means somebody has to decide what is misinformation and what is hate speech. And if the Harris-Walz administration is in charge of making those determinations, well, we know what they'll do. We already know what they'll do because this is what they've already done. If you think that masks won't actually work to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus, that's misinformation. If you think that the COVID-19 virus was leaked from the Wuhan lab instead of just accidentally showing up in somebody's bat soup, that's misinformation. If you think the shot that they're compelling everybody to take lest they get fired and ostracized from society won't actually help to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus, well, that's misinformation. Of course, all three of those things are accurate. They're true. The government knew they were true, but the government said it was misinformation, and they punish people for it. If you think that there's evidence on Hunter Biden's laptop that is incredibly incriminating and should affect the election and how people vote, that's misinformation. And they literally censored that story and ruined people's lives and careers if they tried to talk about it leading up to the last election 4 years ago. Oh, and hate speech. Don't get me started on hate speech. If you think a person who was born with male genitalia and now presents themselves as a woman and wants to play in women's sports and are physically endangering young women's health and lives by engaging in physical activities with them on the athletic playing field, or if you think that it's wrong for
that is a threat to democracy that will...
Excuse me. Don't know how that happened. If you think that it's wrong that a man who was born a man is able to get undressed and expose themselves to your 14-year-old daughter in a locker room, if you dare to say that a man who was born a man who's now acting like a woman should be called or referred to as he and him, well, that would be hate speech in the Harris-Walz administration. So his admission there and concession that misinformation and hate speech isn't protected by the First Amendment is absolutely damning. And in my opinion, disqualifying for anybody to get a vote for any federal office. When he's sworn in on a Bible or whatever book he decides to use, he'll swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. What does he think that Constitution is if he doesn't think the First Amendment protects from those things I just laid out? But it gets worse here from this ignoramus.
Tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim.
Okay, so if this is news to you, I'm sorry about that. It's an indictment of our own media and our own education system in this country. And I don't want you to hear what I'm about to say and then take the ball and run with it and go and replicate this behavior, because it would be horrible and odious and dangerous. But breaking, you can yell fire in a crowded theater. That is, in fact, protected speech. The fact that this guy is a governor of a state in the United States of America, operating under the Constitution of the United States, and he doesn't know that, is absolutely terrifying. The fact that this man wore the uniform of the United States military and theoretically was willing to go and fight and kill and die on behalf of those very rights that are articulated in the Bill of Rights, and he doesn't even understand them, is absolutely horrifying. There was a Supreme Court decision, Oliver Wendell Holmes, back in the turn of the last century, that did say that you can't, that yelling fire in a crowded theater is not protected speech. Of course, the law that was being determined by the Supreme Court at that time had nothing to do with anyone yelling fire anywhere. It was actually the federal government arresting anti-war protesters during World War I. And the people defending the anti-war protesters said this is protected speech. Federal government under Democrat Woodrow Wilson wanted to throw those protesters in prison for daring to challenge his authority and the Democrat administration at the time during World War I. And the Supreme Court backed that up by saying not all speech is protected. And one of the anecdotal examples of protected free speech, or unprotected free speech, I should say, was yelling fire in a crowded theater. Yes, at the time, in 1917, I think it was, the Supreme Court jurisprudence was you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. About 50 years later, right about the time Tim Walz was born, the Supreme Court overruled that. I barely have a high school education. I worked in Broadway theater in the management side for musicals. I'm now a talk radio host and columnist and political commentator right here. I shouldn't know more about First Amendment rights and the history of the First Amendment and protected political speech than the governor of Minnesota and the man who now wants to be vice president of the United States. But here we are. And oh, by the way, that was not something that the journalists who anointed themselves as the schoolmarms and gatekeepers and moderators for this debate, that was not something they felt necessary to be commented on. It's only the First Amendment. It's only the freedom of speech. It's only the freedom of the press. It's only our very lifeblood in this country. And they let that one go by. Oh, I'm glad somebody's fact checking.